Before we open this file and expose the tradecraft that governments deny, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We are peeling back the layers of operations that shaped history, and you won't want to miss the next investigation. Damascus, late summer, 1966. The air in the Al-Hamidiyya souk was thick enough to chew, a heavy mixture of cardamom, roasting lamb, and the diesel fumes of a city preparing for war. To the casual observer, the man browsing the silk stalls was just another European seeking profit in the Levant. He wore a linen suit that was beginning to wrinkle in the humidity, wiped his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief, and haggled over prices with the clumsy, boisterous enthusiasm of a man who had more money than sense. His passport identified him as Jean-Luc Vermeulen, a logistics consultant from Antwerp, Belgium, specializing in heavy machinery transport. He had arrived 6 months prior, flashing a smile and a line of credit that opened doors in a city starved for hard currency. He was charming, slightly overweight, and appeared to enjoy the local Arak liquor a little too much. But Jean-Luc Vermeulen did not exist. The man inside the linen suit was Avner. Born in a kibbutz in the Galilee, he was a Mr., a deep-cover operative of Unit 188, the operational division that preceded the modern Caesarea unit. Avner was not a tourist. He was a sensor, a human recording device embedded in the heart of the enemy capital. He was not there to sabotage. He was there to listen. Unlike the famous Eli Cohen, who had operated in these same streets years earlier, Avner's mandate was strictly non-intervention. "You are a ghost," his handler in Tel Aviv, a man known only as Mike, had told him during his final briefing in a safe house in Brussels. Ghosts do not break things. Ghosts do not make noise. Ghosts do not carry weapons. If you are caught with so much as a penknife, the cover is blown. Your weapon is your legend. Your armor is your silence. Being unarmed in Damascus in 1966 was a calculated risk. The tension between Syria and Israel was at a boiling point. Skirmishes over water rights in the north were daily occurrences. The Syrian Ba'ath Party was fortifying the Golan Heights, turning the plateau into a fortress capable of raining artillery down on Israeli farmers. Avner's mission was to map the supply lines feeding those fortifications. He needed to know not just where the bunkers were, but how the cement and steel were getting there. On this particular Tuesday, Avner was not looking for silk. He was waiting for a signal. He stopped at a brass merchant's stall, feigning interest in an ornate coffee pot. A young boy, no older than 12, ran past, chasing a stray cat. As the boy brushed past Avner's leg, a folded piece of newspaper was slipped into the operative's hand. Avner didn't look down. He continued his negotiation for the pot, bought it for twice its value, and walked casually toward a cafe. Only in the safety of a bathroom stall, hours later, did he read the message written on the margin of the newspaper in invisible ink that reacted to the heat of a lighter flame. The message was 3 words: the mountain. Tonight. The mountain was the code name for Colonel Tariq al-Zahra. And tonight, Avner was going to walk into the lion's den, completely unarmed, to meet a man who was rumored to break subordinates' arms when they brought him bad coffee. To understand the sheer insanity of what Avner was about to attempt, you have to understand the target. Colonel Tariq al-Zahra was not a typical intelligence officer. He was an anomaly of nature. Standing 6'4" and weighing nearly 250 pounds, he was a wall of muscle and scar tissue. In a military hierarchy that often valued political loyalty over competence, al-Zahra was a brute fact that could not be ignored. He was the chief of logistics for the Southern Front. Every bag of cement, every rebar steel beam, and every artillery shell destined for the Golan Heights fortifications passed through his signature. He was also notoriously paranoid and violently temperamental. The Mossad psychological profile on al-Zahra was thick. It described a man who compensated for a lack of formal staff college education with overwhelming physical dominance. He didn't debate. He intimidated. He didn't negotiate. He took. There were reports from the Syrian barracks of al-Zahra ending disputes by simply picking men up and throwing them. He was a grappler, a former wrestler in his youth who had never lost the instinct to crush anything that resisted him. For months, Jean-Luc had been circling the colonel's orbit. He had used the classic honey trap of greed, not sex. He had positioned himself as a man who could solve problems. Syrian logistics were plagued by inefficiency and theft. Avner, with his Belgian connections, had offered Al-Zahra a way to streamline the trucking routes from the Latakia port to the Golan. It was a bait the colonel couldn't resist. Efficiency meant he could skim more money off the top for himself. The meeting scheduled for that night was at Al-Zahra's private villa in the Mossad district, an upscale neighborhood favored by the military elite. It was supposed to be a celebration of a new contract. Avner knew better. Al-Zahra didn't celebrate with foreigners unless he wanted something illegal or unless he was testing them. The intelligence objective was specific. Mossad analysts believed that Al-Zahra kept a shadow ledger, a private notebook where he recorded the actual quantities of materials delivered to the front, as opposed to the inflated numbers sent to the Ministry of Defense. This ledger would reveal the exact thickness of the new bunkers and the precise location of the underground fuel depots. Avner's mission was to enter the villa, locate the safe where the ledger was kept, photograph the contents, and leave. The window of opportunity was supposed to be during a reception the colonel was hosting, but the message, "The mountain tonight," implied a change. The reception had been cancelled. It was now a private meeting. Just the Belgian and the beast. Avner stood in front of the mirror in his apartment. He checked his pockets. No gun, no knife, no garrote wire. Nothing but a pack of cigarettes, a lighter, a wallet, and a specialized Minox subminiature camera concealed within the hollow heel of his right shoe. He looked at his own reflection. He was fit, trained in the intense, stripped-down combat system that would later become known globally as Krav Maga. But he was 5'9" and 170 pounds. In a fair fight against Al-Zahra, physics was not on his side. "The goal is not to fight," he whispered to himself, repeating the mantra of his instructors. "The goal is to deceive." The drive to the Mossad district was a lesson in controlled anxiety. Avner drove a rented Peugeot, the windows rolled down to catch the evening breeze which did little to cool the sweat forming at the base of his spine. He replayed his legend in his mind. Jean-Luc Vermeulen, born Antwerp, 1928. Father was a dock worker. Avoid politics. Like expensive watches. Hate the French. The details had to be instant. Al-Zahra was known to ask rapid-fire questions, looking for a hesitation, a stutter, a bead of sweat that didn't belong. The tradecraft of the 1960s was analog and unforgiving. There were no drones overhead to watch his back, no earpiece connecting him to a support team. If he walked into a trap, he was alone. The panic button was a myth. In the world of deep cover, if you panicked, you disappeared into the basements of the Syrian security services, known as the Mukhabarat. As he approached the villa, he noted the security. It was tighter than usual. 2 soldiers with AK-47s stood at the gate. A jeep with a mounted machine gun was parked down the street. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Avner slowed the car, flashing his headlights twice, the arranged signal. The heavy iron gates groaned open. He drove up the gravel driveway, the crunching of the stones sounding like grinding bones in the silence of the night. He parked the car. He took a breath, holding it for 4 seconds, then releasing it for 4. It was a technique to lower the heart rate to stop the adrenaline from making his hands shake. He needed steady hands. He stepped out of the car. The air smelled of jasmine and gun oil. The front door opened before he could knock. A steward, dressed in a white jacket, bowed slightly. "The colonel is expecting you in the study, Monsieur Vermeulen." Avner walked into the foyer. It was opulent, filled with stolen antiques and heavy Persian rugs. But his eyes were scanning for threats. Exits, front door, guarded. Patio doors to the left, locked. Kitchen to the right. Threats, the steward, unarmed. The guards outside, heavy weaponry. And then the sound of heavy footsteps. The floorboards actually vibrated. Colonel Al-Zahra appeared at the top of the stairs. He was wearing a casual military shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and trousers. Even from this distance, the man looked colossal. His forearms were the size of normal men's thighs. He had a thick black mustache and eyes that looked like drill bits. "Jean-Luc!" Al-Zahra boomed, his voice deep and gravelly. "My Belgian friend, you brought the contracts?" "Better, Colonel," Avner said, his voice steady, adopting the slightly arrogant tone of a European businessman. "I brought the solution to your transport problem." Alzara laughed, a sound devoid of mirth. "Come up. We drink, then we talk business. And if I don't like the business, well, we will see." The study was a testament to the colonel's ego. The walls were lined with photos of him shaking hands with Ba'athist party leaders, hunting trips where he posed next to dead boars, and maps. Dozens of maps. Avner's eyes flicked to the corner of the room. There it was. A heavy steel safe, German-made, sitting behind a mahogany desk. That was the target. Alzara poured 2 glasses of arak. He didn't ask if Avner wanted one. He just shoved the glass into his hand. The colonel's hand engulfed the glass. "To prosperity," Alzara said, clinking his glass so hard Avner feared it would shatter. "To efficiency," Avner replied, taking a sip. The anise-flavored liquor burned, but he welcomed the fire. For the next hour, Avner played the game. He spread blueprints on the desk, explaining how a new rotation of trucks could save the 5th Division 20% in fuel costs. He pointed out bottlenecks in the supply chain. He was brilliant, precise, and boring. He needed to be boring. He needed Alzara to lower his guard, to see him as a nerd, a calculator with legs, not a threat. Alzara listened, his eyes half closed, looking like a predator digesting a meal. But he was attentive. "You know our roads well, Jean-Luc?" "Almost too well." The comment hung in the air. "A test?" "I know logistics, Colonel." Avner shrugged, reaching for a cigarette. "Roads are just lines on a map to me. Time is money. I hate wasting both." Alzara stared at him for a long moment, then grinned. "You are a greedy man." "I like that. Greed is predictable. Ideology is dangerous." The colonel stood up. The movement was sudden. "I need to visit the facilities. Nature calls. You wait here. Touch nothing. The guards outside, they get nervous when guests wander." It was the opening. Alzara exited the room, closing the heavy oak door. Avner heard the heavy footsteps recede down the hall, then the sound of a bathroom door closing. He checked his watch. He had 3 minutes, maybe 4. Avner moved instantly. The sluggish businessman vanished. He was a coiled spring. He moved to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. Silence. He turned to the safe. It was a combination lock, 3 tumblers. He didn't have a stethoscope, and he didn't have time to crack it. But he had intelligence. Mossad analysts had noticed something in the photos of Alzara. He was a creature of habit, and he was sentimental about his military victories. The combination was predicted to be the date of his promotion to colonel. Avner spun the dial. Left to 15, right to 03, left to 62. Click. The handle turned. The intelligence was good. The sensation of the heavy steel door swinging open was better than any drug. Inside, stacks of Syrian pounds, a gold-plated pistol, and a black leather notebook. The shadow ledger. Avner grabbed the notebook. He kicked off his right shoe, twisted the heel, and extracted the Minox camera. He moved to the desk lamp, the only good light source. Snap. Turn page. Snap. Turn page. He worked with rhythmic precision. He wasn't reading the data. He was capturing it. Coordinates of bunkers. Fuel capacities. Ammunition stockpile locations. This was the blueprint of the Syrian defense. He was halfway through the notebook when he froze. The footsteps were coming back. They weren't coming from the bathroom. They were coming from the stairs. Alzara hadn't gone to the bathroom. He had gone to check on the guards. Or perhaps he had just been testing his guest. Avner snapped the notebook shut. He threw it back into the safe. He spun the dial. Locked. He shoved the camera into his pocket. No time to put it back in the shoe. He slipped his shoe back on. The doorknob turned just as Avner sat back down in the chair, picking up his glass of arak. The door flew open. Alzara stood there, but he wasn't smiling anymore. He was holding a piece of paper in his hand. "Jean-Luc," Alzara said, his voice dropping an octave, rumbling like an idling tank engine. "Or should I say, whoever you are." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Avner didn't flinch. He took a sip of his drink, looking bored. "I hope that paper is the signed contract, Colonel. I have a flight to catch tomorrow." Alzara walked into the room, kicking the door shut behind him. He didn't lock it. He didn't need to. He was the lock. "My security officer at the port just called," Alzara said, crumbling the paper in his massive fist. "He decided to check the shipping manifest of your last company in Antwerp, the one you said moved turbines for the dam project." Avner kept his face neutral, but his heart was hammering against his ribs. The backstop. The cover company in Antwerp was real, but the phone lines were redirected to a Mossad safe house in Europe. If they called at night. "He called the Belgian Commerce Authority," Alzara continued, stepping closer. "Closed. But he called a friend in the shipping guild. They say your company exists, but it hasn't shipped a turbine in 5 years. It sells lace." "Do you look like a man who sells lace, Jean-Luc?" "Bureaucracy," Avner scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "The paperwork is always a mess. I trade under a holding company to avoid taxes. You of all people understand avoiding the eyes of the government, Colonel." It was a gamble, appealing to the Colonel's corruption. Alzara stopped. He was 3 feet away. He smelled of tobacco and raw aggression. He looked down at Avner, studying him. The Colonel's eyes drifted to Avner's pocket, the suit jacket pocket where the camera was now creating a slight, almost imperceptible bulge. "You are sweating, Jean-Luc," Alzara whispered. "It is hot, Tariq," Avner replied, using the first name for the first time. A challenge. Alzara's eyes narrowed. "Stand up." "Why? Stand up!" Alzara roared. He reached out and grabbed Avner by the lapels of his linen suit. The speed was terrifying for a man of his size. Avner was hoisted out of the chair as if he were a child. His feet dangled an inch off the ground. The fabric of his suit groaned under the strain. "Who sent you?" Alzara hissed, his face inches from Avner's. "The CIA? The French? Or are you one of the Zionist rats?" Avner's hands were empty. He felt the immense power in the Colonel's grip. If Alzara decided to squeeze, he could crush Avner's windpipe with one hand. If he shouted for the guards, it was over. A black site prison, torture, a public hanging in Marjay Square. Avner realized 2 things in that millisecond. First, Alzara hadn't called the guards yet, because he wanted to handle this himself. He wanted to beat the truth out of the spy personally. Second, the camera in his pocket was hard evidence. He couldn't talk his way out of this. There were no weapons. There was no backup. There was only physics. "I am a businessman," Avner choked out, playing the terrified victim. He let his body go limp, a technique to make the attacker feel dominant, to make him underestimate the resistance. "You are a liar," Alzara growled. He pulled back his right fist, a slab of meat the size of a cinder block, preparing to deliver a blow that would shatter Avner's jaw. The timeline for survival had just collapsed. It wasn't minutes anymore. It was seconds. The human brain processes a threat in roughly 120 milliseconds. But a trained operative, drilled in the responses of close-quarters combat, bypasses the conscious brain. The reaction moves to the amygdala, to muscle memory. Avner saw the shoulder drop, the telegraph of the punch. Alzara was committed. He was putting all 250 pounds into the blow, expecting his victim to be stationary, terrified, and helpless. This was the mistake. In the world of Krav Maga, size is a factor, but leverage is the equalizer. When a massive object moves in one direction, it creates momentum. The goal is not to stop the momentum, but to guide it into a disaster. Second one. As Alzara's fist launched forward, Avner didn't pull away. He stepped in. It is counterintuitive to step toward the danger, but it is the only way to jam the arc of power. Avner dropped his center of gravity and drove his left forearm into the inside of Alzara's swinging arm, deflection, while simultaneously driving his right palm into the Colonel's chin. Second two. The impact snapped Alzara's head back. It didn't knock him out. You don't knock out a giant with one slap, but it disrupted his vision and his balance. The chin jab triggers a spinal reflex. The Colonel flinched. His grip on the lapels loosened for a fraction of a second. Second three. Avner collapsed his structure, dropping to his knees. To Alzara, it looked like the spy was falling, but Avner was loading a spring. As he dropped, he drove his knee into the Colonel's peroneal nerve, the soft spot on the outside of the thigh, just above the knee. Second four. The leg kick is not lethal. But against a man putting weight on that leg to throw a punch, it is catastrophic. Alzara's leg buckled. The mountain began to crumble. He roared, not in pain, but in shock. Second 5. Alzara was falling forward now, his mass working against him. Avner pivoted, moving to the colonel's blind side, the back. He didn't try to grapple the torso. The man was too wide. He went for the neck. Second 6. Avner leaped, wrapping his legs around the colonel's waist to anchor himself, while his arms snaked around the thick, bull-like neck. This was the rear naked choke, but modified for a size disparity. He didn't pull back. He drove his bony forearm into the carotid artery. Second 7. Alzara realized what was happening. He thrashed. He threw himself backward, trying to slam Avner into the wall. The impact was brutal. Avner felt the air leave his lungs as his back hit the plaster, cracking the drywall. But he didn't let go. He squeezed tighter. Second 8. The colonel reached up, clawing at Avner's face, his fingers gauging for eyes. Avner buried his face into the colonel's shoulder to protect his eyes, tightening the vise. He wasn't cutting off air. That takes minutes. He was cutting off blood to the brain. The sleeper. Second 9. The colonel's thrashing slowed. The oxygen debt in the brain was instantaneous. The lights were flickering. The massive body went rigid, then began to sag. Second 10. Alzara collapsed. A dead weight. He hit the floor with a thud that shook the room. Avner rode him down, maintaining the hold for 3 extra seconds to ensure the unconsciousness was deep. Silence returned to the room. The only sound was Avner's ragged breathing. Avner rolled away from the unconscious giant. He checked the colonel's pulse. Strong, but slow. He wasn't dead, just neutralized. He would be out for maybe a minute, maybe 5. Not long enough. Avner stood up, his suit torn, his face bruised. He had to think fast. If he killed him, the investigation would be immediate and total. The borders would close within an hour. If he left him alive, Alzara would wake up and scream for the army. But Avner knew something about Alzara's vanity. He looked at the scene, the half-empty bottle of Iraq, the stress of the business meeting. Avner grabbed the remaining Iraq and poured it over the colonel's shirt. He tipped the chair over. He staged the room to look like a drunken stumble. Then he did the unthinkable. He knelt down and whispered into the ear of the unconscious man. This was a psychological seed, planted in the twilight state of consciousness. "If you speak," Avner whispered in perfect Arabic, "we release the photos of the ledger to the president. They will hang you for corruption before they hang me for spying." It was a bluff. If Alzara woke up, he'd likely kill Avner anyway. But it was the only insurance he had. Avner grabbed the Minox camera from the floor where it had fallen. He checked it. Intact. He moved to the door. He straightened his tie. He smoothed his hair. He had to walk past the steward and the guards. He had to look like a man leaving a meeting, not a man fleeing a fight. He opened the door. The hallway was empty. He walked down the stairs. The steward appeared. "Leaving so soon, monsieur? The colonel is indisposed," Avner said, rolling his eyes and miming a drinking motion. He decided to take a nap on the rug. Do not disturb him until morning. He was very insistent. He has a headache. The steward smirked, shaking his head. It was a believable story. The colonel was known for his excesses. "I will see myself out," Avner said. He walked to the front door. His legs felt like jelly. Every instinct screamed run, but he walked. The walk to the car took a lifetime. The gravel crunched. The guards at the gate watched him. One of them lit a cigarette, the flare of the match illuminating a bored face. Avner got into the Peugeot. He started the engine. He waved at the guard. The gate opened. He drove out. He didn't speed. He kept the car at exactly the speed limit. He watched the rearview mirror, waiting for the explosion of activity. The sirens, the lights. Nothing. He drove 5 miles before he pulled over into a dark alley. He vomited. The adrenaline dump hit him all at once. His hand shook so violently he couldn't hold the steering wheel. He looked at the camera. The film inside held the secrets of the Golan. He couldn't go back to his apartment. If Alzara woke up and decided to ignore the threat, the apartment would be the first place the Mukhabarat raided. He had to initiate the emergency exfiltration protocol. He drove to a predetermined location, a garage in the Christian quarter. There, a Syrian, a local helper, had a truck waiting, a vegetable truck heading for the Lebanese border. Chapter 10. The Crossing. The journey to the border was a nightmare of checkpoints and claustrophobia. Avner was hidden in a false compartment beneath crates of cauliflower. The smell was overpowering, a mix of rotting vegetation and diesel. At the border crossing, he heard the voices of Syrian soldiers. They were laughing, arguing about football. He heard the heavy thud of a boot hitting the side of the truck. "Open the back!" a soldier shouted. Avner held his breath. He had the camera taped to the inside of his thigh. If they found him, he was dead. But worse, the intelligence was lost. He heard crates being moved. He lay in the darkness, gripping a small, sharp piece of metal he had found in the compartment, his only weapon now. He would not be taken alive. "Let him go. It's just vegetables," another voice said. "It stinks. Get it out of here." The truck lurched forward. They crossed into Lebanon. Then a switch to a car. Then a boat from a quiet beach south of Beirut. Only when he saw the lights of a vessel waiting in international waters, a classic fishing trawler silhouette that Mossad often used, did he allow himself to believe he had survived. Chapter 11. The debrief Tel Aviv. 48 hours later. The room was sterile, air-conditioned, and smelled of stale coffee. Avner sat at a table. Opposite him sat Mike and two generals from the IDF Northern Command. On the table were the developed photos from the Minox. "The bunker walls are double thickness," one general said, pointing at a grainy image of the ledger. "Our 105mm shells would have bounced off. We need to upgrade the artillery for the precursor strike. And the fuel depots," the other pointed out. "He buried them deep, but here are the ventilation shaft coordinates. If we drop a canister down those shafts..." Mike looked at Avner. "And the colonel? Al-Zara?" "He's alive," Avner said quietly. "I left him sleeping." "He will be purged," Mike said, lighting a cigarette. "When he realizes the notebook was photographed, he won't report it. He can't. If he admits a spy saw his corruption ledger, his own government will execute him. He will swallow it. He will stay silent to save his own skin." Avner nodded. He knew the type. Corruption was a leash, and Mossad had just pulled it tight. Chapter 12. The Silent War, 6 months later, June 1967. The Six-Day War erupted. On the northern front, the Israeli Air Force and artillery pounded the Golan Heights. The strikes were surgically precise. They hit ventilation shafts that no one knew existed. They cracked bunkers that looked impenetrable but had structural weaknesses identified in a stolen ledger. The Syrian defenses collapsed faster than anyone expected. The mountain of the Golan fell. Avner watched the news from a cafe in Paris, where he was already building his next legend. He saw the footage of Israeli troops advancing up the heights. He wondered about Al-Zara. Intelligence reports said the colonel had been relieved of command shortly after the incident in the villa. Rumors of erratic behavior and paranoia. He had retired to a quiet life, a broken giant who jumped at shadows. Avner took a sip of his coffee. He was unarmed. He was invisible. And he knew, better than anyone, that the biggest victories are not won by armies, but by a single person in a room, holding their breath, counting the seconds. This is how the shadow world operates. If you want to know more about the operations they don't teach in history books, hit that subscribe button. The next file is already open.